tonight he is not that person. So he will introduce himself. We're ready for the sermon, sir.
Excellent.
All right,
Okay.
take it away.
First of all, thank you very much for coming tonight and listening. We do appreciate it. And again, my name is Francis Makemie, and I want to start with just one quote, and it is from Psalm 50. Whoso offereth praise glorify, pardon me, begone tongue demon. Sometimes praise glorifieth me, and to him that ordereth his conversation aright will I show the salvation of God. All right? Show the salvation of God. It's a very simple passage talking about how if you walk orderly with the Lord, he will show you his salvation. That's all that passage means. And I got thrown in prison for preaching that's the exact same quote right there that we just read. And so we're going to find out why tonight. And we're going to talk about, for example, the reason I visit. I visit for two main reasons. First of all, I want to learn a little bit more about your time, and then I want to have you learn a little bit more about my time. For example, in my time, we were ruled by kings and queens. And I understand in your time, you are now ruled by presidents. Is that correct? Very good. How is that working for you? Maybe you better stick to my time. Okay. In my time. Now, to understand my story, a lot of folks call me a defender of religious freedom, and I suppose that's true. Some people call me your forefather's forefather, and I think that's fair. However, I was a Presbyterian minister who did go to jail for his faith. Now, to understand my story and what I did for our freedom of religion, we need to understand what life was like politically and socially and religiously in three different places. Right? Let's start with Great Britain. I was born in County Donegal, Ireland. That is Northern Ireland, in a little outside little town called Ramelton. I was a Presbyterian, my brothers and sisters, Presbyterians, our family, we were Presbyterian. A pretty benign religion, I've always thought so anyway. So, we grew up there as Presbyterians. However, the world was not kind to Presbyterians when I was born. And so I was born in 1658, the second half of the 17th century. And when I was born, that time was called, for Presbyterians, it was called the killing times. During that last half of the century, over 18,000 Presbyterians died. And the main reason was religion. You don't hear this talked about much anymore. Well, let's figure out why this is happening. So, we all know the story of King Henry VIII, right? He needed a divorce. And before then, he was a really good Catholic. Wrote a book called Defense of the Seven Sacraments. He was a good Catholic, friends with the Pope. But then he needed a divorce, so you tell me, what did he do? Yeah, he created his own religion, just out of thin air. Created his own religion. Pretty amazing thing, because it's actually a world-changing thing he did. But by creating his own religion, he could give himself a divorce like he wanted, but also he could now take charge of all the Catholic-owned property in England and Great Britain. That was all now his. It was a pretty smart deal for him, pretty good deal. Unfortunately, for the population, not so good. What he set up then was about 100 years of constant fighting and bloodshed, whether or not England was going to be Catholic or they're going to be Church of England. Back and forth the fighting goes. People are dying. You know his daughter who took over the throne. Do we know her name? Her name is Mary. Yeah, you know her nickname? Bloody Mary, all right? Because Catholics and Anglicans were fighting. Now here's the thing. To us Presbyterians, it didn't matter who won, Catholic or Protestant, we're going to lose, okay? We're going to lose. It's not going to go well for us, and it didn't. And so we were just constantly there in the crack, being persecuted. And this fighting went back and forth, and eventually Queen Elizabeth took the throne, and then King James took the throne. My own pastor, Thomas Drummond, was thrown in prison for being a Presbyterian. All right? And then, in 1664, Parliament passed an amazing law called the Conventicle Act. Ever heard of this law? It's okay, that's why I'm here tonight, right? The Conventicle Act, it said that no more than 3 Presbyterians could meet in one place at one time. When was the last time you knew 3 dangerous Presbyterians? It's just not going to happen, right? And so, constantly persecuted, and we need to figure out why. Here's the main reason. if I was an Anglican priest and I preached an Anglican sermon about that quote I just read, that would be fine. But if I preach it as a Presbyterian, I'm not just preaching heresy. No. Who's in charge? Who's the top person in the Church of England? It's the king. When you preach a religious service that's not Church of England, you're committing treason. When church and state are together, it causes all kinds of problems. People are going to die. So, you're not preaching just heresy, you're preaching treason. And so all these treasonous Presbyterians running around, they had to figure a way, to get rid of them, and they were doing a pretty good job of it. So, that's what life is like in England, Ireland. I was from Northern Ireland. For example, I couldn't go to Trinity College where I wanted to go to college. They didn't allow Presbyterians. I went to University of Glasgow, right across the way in Scotland. And I was ordained as a minister. So let's switch to Virginia. That's what things are like in England. Let's switch to Virginia, where we are right now. So that brings us to King James. All right, he's on the throne, and the name of his town couldn't be easier, right? It is Jamestown. And who can tell me why? Why did these people come to Virginia at all? Any ideas?
Practice their own religion.
All right, to practice their own religion. And so I want to thank you so much for saying that, because that's the rumor we have to dispel tonight, okay? Jamestown had very little to do with religion as far as religious freedom, okay? We'll talk about what they had to do with religion in a second. But see, Jamestown was settled by the Virginia Company. Those two words give everything away. Virginia says where they want to go. Company says what they want to do. If you're a company, what do you want? Money. They're here to make money. And King James was letting this company come to the New World and make money. And actually, a few years before that, England signed a treaty with Spain saying that England, the country, would not go to the New World, because Spain was getting lots of gold from the New World, sending it back to Europe. However, we had this treaty that says we're not going to go settle over it in the New World, so he sends a private company. This way it couldn't come back on him. But that's how the Virginia companies work. Yeah, they're totally working for him. However, these folks are here to make money. However, back then, religion, extremely important part of every person's life, you did not do something, even make money, without in some way serving the Lord. So they had it put in their provision. Besides looking for raw material, they had it in their charter. They had a provision that said they had to Christianize the natives. All right, so now they're doing it for religious reasons. It's not just about making money. The natives here in Chincoteague, they had their own religion, polytheistic. All right, they had many gods, right? There was two main gods, one named Oki, one named Ahoni. Ahoni, he was the nice one. He could not help but give you things. That was his role. He gave you things. Just couldn't stop. He was so good. Oki was the exact opposite. And so you're constantly giving alms to one of these two people. Which one are you going to worship and give alms to? It's going to be Oki, because he's the guy that's going to take things or cause you to be sick or whatever trouble in your life. So they had their own religion, but now the English are coming to change all of that. And these guys coming to Jamestown, they are staunch Church of England, which we also say Anglican sometimes, right? These are Church of England, and they're determined that Virginia will be Church of England, determined those Indians will be Church of England, and anybody that comes here. So now they understood. There were a few Catholics mixed in the group. A couple of Catholic spies, came to Jamestown. And I will mention that there was a map of Jamestown. One of the first drawings of Jamestown was found in the Spanish archives. It's called the Zuniga map. Zuniga was the ambassador to England back then. The map got smuggled back to England to him and then back to Madrid. Spain, the Catholics, were watching Virginia closely, but it was going to stay Church of England. And so now, let's move up to one more colony we need to talk about. Any ideas? About 5 miles from here. Maryland. We need to talk about what's going on in Maryland. So, King James, he passes on. His son, King Charles, takes over the throne. King Charles has this constant warfare in his country from Catholics, trouble always being caused by Catholics. And King Charles got an idea, another brilliant idea, I think. He owed a man money. The man's name was Lord Baltimore. Lord Baltimore was a Catholic, and he saw a way to kill two birds with one stone. He said, what we will do, he called in Lord Baltimore, he says, I'm going to give you all this land to clear our debt. I'm going to give you all this land over in the New World. How much did that cost King Charles? Nothing whatsoever, right? He's going to pay his debt with land that he doesn't really own or care about. He says, and this, furthermore, this is a place for Catholics. I want you to set up a Catholic colony up in Maryland. And so that's the idea for King Charles. And so Lord Baltimore, he comes, he sets up a colony. You all know the first colony up there in Maryland? St. Mary's City, all right? Mary, all right? It's a Catholic colony. And so Lord Baltimore now has to sell all of this land that he's been given so he can make his profit off of it. But the strangest things happen. Even though there are constant warfare, Catholics really didn't go. They didn't go to the New World. Presbyterians were already going because they were being persecuted. But Catholics, they want to stay and fight it out in Great Britain. So very few Catholics came to Maryland like he had planned. And so Lord Baltimore, he now has to figure something out for himself. What will work for him to make money? And he comes up with a brilliant plan for himself. And it's also world-changing in my opinion. He announced that his new colony of Maryland would be a colony of toleration. We're going to hear that word a lot tonight. The word toleration, because this allowed anybody from any religion to go to Maryland. Like, this is a world-changing thing here. A place in the world where anybody from any religion, you might be Quaker, you might be Catholic, you might be Presbyterian, you now have a place to go. You can preach and teach unmolested. Now, so all of a sudden, Presbyterians being persecuted, they are flooding to Maryland. They're going to Maryland, and I need to tell you about Presbyterian. Any Presbyterians here tonight?
I grew up.
Presbyterian, awesome. And so, you know what a presbytery is, okay? The local governing body, or say a regional body of Presbyterians, they get together. And our presbytery was called Logan Presbytery in Northern Ireland. They received a letter from a man, William Stevens, on Lord Baltimore's council. He sent a letter saying, we're being flooded with Presbyterians. They need pastors. Can you send us some pastors? And at that same time this letter arrives, I graduate. I am ordained, and clearly the good Lord is sending me a message. I am needed in the new world. So we understand what life is like in three places if you're a Presbyterian. And so I start looking for a ship. I'm going to go to the New World, work with Presbyterians there. It is not easy back then to get a ship to the location you want to go to, the destination you want to go to. So my ship that I got on went to Norfolk. Not too far away, not a problem at all. I got a ship to Norfolk. And I got off the dock. It was the strangest thing. Across from that dock, was on Elizabeth River, was a church, an Anglican church, that had just lost their pastor. And this, I still have trouble wrapping my brain around this today. Back then, a Presbyterian, or even a Catholic, you could go preach in an Episcopalian church and be fine, but if you went down the street and preached in a Catholic or Presbyterian church, you could get arrested. All right? So there was a shortage of Anglican priests here, so they were actually welcoming Presbyterians, but you had to just not speak heresy against the king. Okay, that's all you had to do. And so they invited me to be their pastor. And I thought, this is so bizarre. These people who are killing us back in England now want me to come be their pastor. And I said, no. And somewhere in the journey, I heard about a colony of Presbyterians down in South Carolina. I said, maybe there. Maybe that's where I'm supposed to go. And so I got on a ship in Norfolk to head down to South Carolina. 5 weeks. For 5 weeks, we tried exiting the bay, and storms beat us back every single time. And these are sailing ships. This is not unusual at all. Remember those original Jamestown settlers? They spent 6 weeks in the English Channel before they could leave. You have to wait for your time is right. So 5 weeks of trying to get out of the Chesapeake Bay and our sailing ship, we have to put back in for provisions the same dock we had just left. And so I realized, okay, God is sending me a message. And I stayed, and I served that church as their pastor for about the next year or so. And then it started to bother me. This wasn't right. I'm supposed to be serving Presbyterians in the New World. Now I have to figure out where to go. And South Carolina was an option, but now I'm feeling pulled more in this direction. I'm a young man without any family, any business ties really, and no children. And so young men will often do what they want to do. And they see very little danger in things when you're young. And so I said, I have a choice. I can go up to Maryland and preach unmolested, not be thrown in jail, or I could stay here in Virginia. Which one did I go for? Virginia. I was a young man, so I went to Virginia. Now, to be fair, I came to Accomack County. I was pretty far from the capital, which is Jamestown at the time, and in 1699 becomes Williamsburg. I'm far from the capital. I could always go across the border to across the border to Baltimore, to Maryland, and preach. I actually did that. Set up churches over there as well, set up congregations here. And so things were going pretty well for me. And unfortunately, I'm starting to run out of money. Thankfully, there was a man named William Anderson. And he was a businessman and plantation owner here on the shore, here in Accomack County. And he took me under his wing, and he taught me business. Before I knew it, I was a merchant. I was selling tobacco, many tobacco, and indigo, and cotton, and sending these things quite often to Barbados, one of the few islands in the Caribbean that the English were able to keep hold of. That's an English island down there. So I constantly was traveling now from here down to Barbados, back and forth, back and forth. It was going well. And so I was able to buy land here myself. You know where my house was, right? Over here in Temperanceville, 5 miles away from where we are right now. And then I had another house down in Endicott over there. I had property all over. And also, wanting to promote business in this area, seeing the shore needed more business, I set up a mill for anyone to come use pretty much. You get more for your corn if it's ground up before you send it to market. And so I set up a community mill, and that is extremely close to where we are right now. If you leave where we are, I do not know your modern state road numbers, okay? However, if you leave here and you go back to the mainland, and you'll come to a farm, all right? And you're going to make a left turn at this farm. I think the family name is Royal. You've seen these rural farms everywhere, all right? But you go over there, you make a left, you go down to Assawoman Creek, and you will find a mill pond where my mill used to be. So, I'm saying that things are going really, really well, all right? And then, one of the truly amazing things happened. Back in England, there's some bad news. King James II is taking the throne, and this is in 1688. He's going to take the throne and turn the country back to Catholic. All right, what is this going to mean? Another 100 years of bloodshed and fighting back and forth. So that's going to happen in 1688. Anybody remember what happened in 1588 in England? Who attacked with the Spanish Armada? All right, so Spain attacks England, Spanish Armada. Two heroes from, we know them well, Christopher Newport and Sir Francis Drake, defended England, defeated the Spanish Armada. That's 1588. 100 years later, they're still fighting. Who's going to be Catholic or who's going to be English? What England's going to be? And so everybody is now worried. 1688, this new king's going to turn us back Catholic. Here we go again. More bloodshed. Two people said no. And one was his daughter, interestingly enough. Did anybody know the name of the two people who came in that was called the Glorious Revolution? They took over. They took over England, put themselves on the throne. Anybody know their names? Anybody back up? William and Mary. Well done. That college, right? That's what we're talking about. William and Mary. And so they take over the throne. Then they do something truly amazing. Besides taking over the throne, they're going to keep England, Church of England, and they take over the throne. The very next year, 1689, they pass the Act of Toleration. Oh, this is wonderful. The Act of Toleration. What this meant is that any dissenter, all right, so I was called a dissenter back then, or a Protestant, and so any dissenter, dissenting minister, could now preach anywhere in English territory. All you had to do, there's always catches to things, all you had to do was go to your local courthouse and get your license. A license to preach. That's fine. And so at the time, I was down in Barbados when this passed, so I got my license from Barbados. I come back to the shore, and I don't mind saying I married well. I married William Anderson Starr. And so now, when he passes away, I get his land as well. So I'm making a lot of money here on the shore, doing real well. And how things change now. Things are good, but not everybody is happy about this act of toleration, okay? And I'm going to mention society in a second. I will say, in 1699, because I was doing so well setting up churches here on the shore, that I was called to Williamsburg. People say I was arrested. That's not exactly true. I was summoned to Williamsburg by the governor, a man named Francis Nicholson. And he calls me and he says, okay, Makemie, what is going on over there? Do you have a license to preach? And so I'm hearing a lot about you. I think mainly he was hearing that I was over here making money. All right, you don't want to offend a person like that. But so we sat down and we talked, and I produced my license from Barbados. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, go back to Accomack, get your license from the county, the county clerk in Accomack, and you'll be fine to preach. All right, good enough. Except I saw pressure showing up from a place I hadn't planned on. Parliament had passed this law, Act of Toleration. Does that mean the Church of England is going to sit still? No, no. And they couldn't defeat this law on the upper levels of government, but they said maybe we can defeat it on the lower levels of government. So what they did, in 1701, they created something called the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. Well, that sounds all right. I've joined something like that, Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. In your time, do they ever give bad legislation good names? Okay, no, that never happens, right? And so, but that's the idea. And it was, but to be fair, it was the Anglican Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. And we Presbyterians knew, I knew it here on the shore, if I was involved in a court case against a Church of England, I was going to lose. I couldn't run for office. I knew that that if I went to the bank for a loan, I wasn't going to get it. They were to control local government and push out Presbyterians, send the message, we were not welcome here in Virginia. Virginia was staunch Church of England. And so I said, okay, we've now got to fight this new enemy called the Society. And I remembered the way Presbyterians get together. We didn't have in this country a presbytery. We needed to join forces, become organized, and then we would stand a chance against this society. And so what I did, I got it started up in Philadelphia, which back then was our largest city here in the colonies. In Philadelphia, I invited three men from Maryland, another fellow from Delaware, another minister from Pennsylvania. We representing these middle colonies. We started the very first presbytery here in America. And unfortunately, I also started the very first presbytery meeting for which some people have yet to forgive me. But that's what we did. We organized. Now we have a chance against these other folks from being pushed out. But then I went back for my second presbytery meeting, which was in December of 1706. And this time I decided after that meeting I wanted to go up in New York, New Jersey, and then up into New England, find pastors that would also join our presbytery. It'd be a really big presbytery. But I wanted to find other pastors who would join and find out what the situation was up there. And I heard, before I ever got there, that there would be trouble in New York and New Jersey. They had a governor. His name was Lord Cornbury. He hated Presbyterians. He was known for hating Presbyterians. His other name is Edward Hyde. All right? Have you ever heard of Hyde Park from up there? Named after him. I don't think anything should be named for him. And so, horrible human being. For example, this is true. If in a town up there in New York or New Jersey, if there was a Presbyterian church, they had built a nice church in that town, and it was a better facility than the Anglican church, he would come in, evict the Presbyterians, and move the Anglican church into that building. He had that power. He was not going to put up with Presbyterians where he lived. So we're going through, after this Presbyterian meeting, we're heading up through New York and New Jersey. Again, he's the governor of both. And we, like most businessmen at the time, if you're traveling through, you quite often got invited to the governor's mansion for dinner. We went there, we had dinner, and it was really, really nice until he found out who we were. So, and he told us that night, he says, under no circumstances are you to preach in any church in my jurisdiction. Pretty simple. But I heard the loophole. Did you hear the loophole?
Sure.
Church. Very good. And so we said, fine, we will not preach in any church in your jurisdiction. Sunday morning came. I got an invitation to preach in a person's house. The man's name was William Anderson. He was a cobbler, a shoemaker up in New York on Pearl Street. Went to his house. And it was a tiny service. This kind of reminds me. There was 10 people. 10 people showed up. We did one baptism. I preached on that quote, that scripture right there from Psalm 50, talking about walking with God, and he'll show you his mercy. How simple is that? I could have preached it in an Episcopalian church with no trouble whatsoever. So I preached that sermon, did the baptism, and then a friend of mine, we were traveling together. We're leaving New York, and the sheriff had been sent out to arrest me. I was brought back in front of the governor, and he told me that I was not supposed to, he made it clear I was not supposed to preach in his jurisdiction. I said, you didn't say anything about church. We preached in a house. And he says, but you need a license. And I said, oh, I've got my license. And he says, that license from Virginia. This is not Virginia. I says, well, I don't think you can like my one from Barbados much better. But he says to me, he was very plain about this. He said, for your bond and security, you may leave. For your bond and security. I knew exactly what he meant. Bond back then, that's your word, okay? And the word he asked me to promise, I had to promise him that I would never again preach in his jurisdiction, okay? I could never even return to New York or New Jersey. And there people from your time have told me, Makemie, not having to go back to New Jersey is not a bad thing. But that's fine. And so he looked at me, he said, that's your bond, your word, you will never come back. Security, money. I had to pay him a bribe if I wanted to be let free. And so this is a man who, because I was committing heresy and treason, he could have had me killed, okay? He could have me executed, could put me to jail for the rest of my life. I am now a 48-year-old man. I have a family now here, 2 beautiful daughters. I got businesses all over the shore down in Barbados. It's a whole different situation. And I'm not the same young man I had before. Now I have much to lose. And he's given me a clear declaration of what he expects. And then I remembered Peter stepping out of the boat. He stepped out on faith. And so I looked that man and straight in the eye, and I said, sir, if asked to preach in your jurisdiction again, I will do so. He sent to jail with you. This Presbyterian minister was sent to prison. Now, it was going to be a jury trial, and after 6 weeks in prison, I was allowed to come back to Virginia and prepare my defense. And this trial, though, it became a pretty famous trial here in the colonies. In your time, are there certain trials the public just follows with just all kinds of fascination to see how it's going to come out? Yeah, I think you got a couple more coming up. However, this is happening back then. Every colony is following this trial. This is one of the first trials about freedom of religion in this country ever. And so I had a chance to win something big. I prepared well, hired 3 expensive lawyers, took them with me. I did publish, by the way, the court records of what happened. And unfortunately, I did a lot of the talking, which I like to do. But I got up in front of them and I said, hey, if you have a license from any of the king and queen's colonies, it should be good anywhere, because that's who we are honoring. We're not committing, and by the way, it changed to Queen Anne at this time. And I said, I am not committing any offense against Queen Anne. We love her. She's letting us preach and teach like we want. And he says, I'll even tell you first. It says in the Act of Toleration that when a Presbyterian preaches a sermon, they have to unlock the doors. You have to unlock the doors. That way, any sheriff or constable coming by can open the doors as they wished, look inside, and see that you are not preaching against the crown. All right? And I said, that morning, I didn't just unlock the doors. That morning, I opened the doors. And that cold January morning in New York, I opened the doors. Anybody could come by and see that I was not doing anything treasonous against our Queen Anne. And so it went to the jury now. We had our say, it went to the jury. And friends, I'm very happy to tell you that I won. And I feel guilty by saying I won, because I didn't. We all won. One of the first major cases of religious freedom ever was won for all of us right there, especially us Presbyterians. And naturally, the good Lord won. And so it was a big win. I think it's so appropriate to talk about it on this day when we talk about our freedoms being won. And so, what I have done so far is I have now done a ton of talking. I've just done a ton of talking. And I always save time for you here at the end. What questions do you have for me? And I'm happy to answer as Francis Makemie or my good friend Anthony Burcher. Okay? So any questions about anything we talked about tonight?
The little church down in Hancock,
Mhm.
did you start that?
Did not. Okay? There's two churches, one named Naomi for my wife, and Francis Makemie for me. Those came much later, but they're named in my honor, so I do greatly appreciate that. All right. Any other good
He
questions?
did build one.
Rehoboth was his main church across the border in Maryland. Yeah. And so, nice. Any other good questions? He also had Snow Hill, Pitts Creek, Rehoboth, Wacomico. He had several churches that he helped start.
Minoka.
Pardon?
Minoka.
Oh, but yeah, I say Manikin, Minoka. Okay, yeah, very good. All right. Any other good questions?
What was Cornbury's response to losing?
Oh, his response was to make me pay for all the court costs, even though I had won the trial. And the good news about Cornbury, though, is that eventually he got recalled to England, spent some time in jail for his corruption. So, the good, good sometimes wins, and it won out in that case. All right.
What was the repercussions of the case in one?
The repercussions. Now, people were not, local governments were now scared to arrest dissenting ministers. And so we gained a freedom. And that freedom sort of steamrolls. And when those people got together to write the Constitution, almost 100 years later, not quite 100 years later, they're going to think about freedom of religion. But maybe they're going to think about the danger of church and state being together. Because when that happens, people die, people get jailed. All right, so another message from me tonight, keep church and state separate. But that's for your time to figure out, right? All right.
And the presbytery that he set up among the states to lay a foundation for
Sure.
Presbyterianism.
And then individual Presbyterians started popping up all over the colonies after that. So, yeah.
Well, this isn't a question, but rather a statement.
Sure.
I had one of my earliest ancestors arrived at the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1635, and he immediately got into trouble. He said that the Church of England had no business telling the colonists how to worship, and what really got him, he said they should pay the Indians for the land they took from them. 1637, he was banished from the colony.
Wow, those aren't popular opinions.
And he went down the coast. He's not listed among the Roger Williams group, but he ended up with them eventually, with what was then Providence Plantation, which is now Providence Plantation in the state of Rhode Island. And there he co-founded the First Baptist Church in the colonies. And that was 1637.
And so he's bringing up a good point here, in that this is the Puritans and the Pilgrims up there in New England, okay, which were 13 years after Jamestown. They are the ones coming for religious freedom, right?
Yeah.
They don't like the Church of England very well, and so they're coming here for their own. They want to worship if they want to worship, so I certainly understood that. All right. Well, friends, it has been my pleasure to be with you this evening. I thank you for your good listening, and so applause is always welcome.